is it? Your good friend Sweeney. You, sir!
The story of Sweeney Todd began in a Penny Dreadful serial in the late 1800s, and after being adapted into an award-winning Broadway musical by Stephen Sondheim, Tim Burton took the reins in translating this musical to film in 2007's Sweeney Todd, the Demon Barber of Fleet Street. Famous for his dark Gothic films, Burton seemed an excellent choice for the directing job, and by no means was Sweeney Todd a bad film. It was a great tale of corruption and revenge, with some brilliant songs and acting by the cast. However, the quality of the overall film is not what I'm here to talk about. I want to talk about the women of Sweeney Todd. What's interesting is that I've never previously had much of an issue with how Burton's represented women in his films. I've seen most of his famous filmography, and this has not stuck out to me as much as it does in Sweeney Todd. He does base a lot of his films around a male protagonist story, but that's not a problem to me, as maybe he just feels more comfortable directing male-centered stories. So, what brought me to analysing how women are represented and portrayed in Burton's film adaptation of Sweeney Todd? Well, the film centres around a male central protagonist, Sweeney Todd, and his quest for revenge, but also features 3 important female characters. His female co-conspirator and pseudo-love interest, Mrs. Lovett, is pretty well fleshed out and has her own goals and motivations in the film, some of which are explored through song. However, I was shocked by how little agency the 2 other women had in the film. Johanna and Lucy Barker are Todd's family, and the motivation for his revenge. But despite still being alive and instrumental in the film's plot, their roles were minimal and influenced mainly by the men in the film. It should go without saying, but spoilers ahead. The story. Sweeney Todd, the Demon Barber of Fleet Street, tells the tale of a man falsely accused of a crime and locked up abroad for 15 years. He returns to London as a bitter, revenge-seeking man, a shadow of his former self. He comes home to his barber shop, his family gone, where he teams up with Mrs. Lovett to seek revenge on the judge that imprisoned him. Judge Turpin sought to seduce Todd's wife, Lucy, by having him arrested and deported, but she was clearly not interested. Lucy poisoned herself, which left her daughter in the judge's care. This works out well for the perverted judge, as he then plans to marry Todd's daughter, Johanna, the second she turns 16. There's a small subplot wherein a young sailor named Anthony falls in love with Johanna and attempts to steal her away from the creepy judge by working with Todd. One of Todd's first victims, a rival barber, has a servant boy that Mrs. Lovett sort of adopts. His name's Toby, although he's unaware of the murder spree Todd quickly sets off on. Todd's victims are baked into pies and sold by Mrs. Lovett, which actually greatly improves the quality of her pies and brings them a lot of success. Eventually, Todd achieves his revenge on the judge, but not before slitting the throat of the nosy beggar woman creeping around his shop. Seeing this beggar woman in the bright light of the furnace downstairs, he recognizes her as Lucy, and he kills Mrs. Lovett for lying to him about Lucy's survival. Toby then slits Todd's throat, ending the story. It's a bleak tale about a man getting wrapped up in his revenge and letting it consume and change him entirely. In enacting his revenge, lives are lost and altered forever. The characters. Mrs. Lovett. As I said, I don't really have a problem with the portrayal of Mrs. Lovett. She's one of the most three-dimensional characters in the script, and Helena Bonham Carter brings her to life with the brilliant craziness and charm that she tends to bring to her characters. Although Todd is the central character and leading man of the film, Mrs. Lovett is his partner in crime, and therefore plays a large part in moving the plot forward and supporting Todd. However, due to her infatuation with Todd, she never really rises above a supporting role in the film. Even so, Mrs. Lovett has a lot going for her in the script. She loves Todd, is conflicted, for the most part, about her love for her surrogate son Toby and loyalty to Todd, is just as callous as Todd in killing members of the public to boost sales in her shop. And she's quite manipulative in making Todd think Lucy is already dead, so she can slide into his DMs easier.
Times are so hard once you venture out.
What, there? No, I won't go near it. People think it's haunted.
Haunted?
Yeah. Who's to say they're wrong?
She's a pretty good match for Todd in terms of wickedness. She's also a lot of fun, and really well portrayed by Helena Bonham Carter. Mrs. Lovett is in over half the songs in the film, including 3 solos. Poor Thing, By the Sea, Wait. Her solo By the Sea outlines her plans for the future, which of course includes marriage to Todd, with Toby as their adopted son. Mrs. Lovett is set on this dream, even if it means lying about Lucy, murdering their neighbours, and even Toby by the film's end. I'll give her credit that in her fantasy, Todd is still pretty cold to her, so she's not completely oblivious to his nature. Still, she is pretty oblivious to him using her solely to enact his revenge, and is delusional in ignoring this. Such as thinking Todd is A-OK with Lucy being dead and all is forgiven, when Todd's feelings on forgiveness have been demonstrated plenty throughout the film. We only know Mrs. Lovett by her title. Her first name is not mentioned. It's interesting how this ties into her character arc of trying to build this idyllic family with Todd. Todd never refers to her by her first name, indicating he doesn't want this personal connection with her. In return, she also refers to him as Mr. Todd, perhaps copying him in an attempt to create a bond there. Mrs. Lovett is also quite maternal. While she seems to envy and dislike Lucy, she speaks fondly of Lucy and Todd's daughter, Johanna.
Poor little Johanna. All those years without a scrap of motherly affection. Well, what's sense to that?
Her maternal nature is shown in her relationship with Toby. She's affectionate towards him from the moment they meet, until he gets close to ruining hers and Todd's plans. She is completely devoted to Todd above all, and that is her downfall. Lucy Barker. Lucy is Todd's, the barber formerly known as Benjamin Barker's, wife. Judge Turpin lusted after Lucy and destroyed the lives of her entire family in order to have her. There doesn't seem to be much more to his motivation than lust. Judge Turpin framing and imprisoning her husband didn't exactly appeal to Lucy's romantic side, so she hid away in the barber shop until the judge tricked her into coming to a party, where he assaulted her as partygoers laughed. Lucy has probably the saddest story in the film, and the least agenda. Dismissed, even by the audience, as the crazy beggar woman who keeps popping up to tell us how terrible everything is.
So don't you go trespassing there, or it's a good whipping for you. Or any other young man with mischief on his mind. Mischief.
Desired by a man who destroyed her marriage, then attacked her, thus leaving her in presumed squalor without an income. Lucy attempts suicide, which fails, sending her insane. She wanders the streets of London, forgetting the life she knew before, battered away by Mrs. Lovett and Anthony. Like Todd, there are 2 Lucys, the beautiful, clean, happy Lucy we meet in flashback, and the crass, dirty, and insane Lucy that appears throughout the film briefly. For most of the film, the audience is unaware that the beggar woman is Lucy. She certainly appears very different to the flashback, but the camera is careful to never quite show her face, and instead focus on the large bonnet she wears to shroud her in darkness. When she tells Anthony about Johanna and the judge, there doesn't seem to be any recognition for her daughter or the man who ruined her life. This is most likely the result of poisoning herself and her stay in a madhouse, as she has repressed these memories. She seems to hold no ill will towards the judge, and maybe that's better for her, free from the awful memories of the past. Despite this, throughout the film, she creeps around the judge's home and tries to enter the barber shop on multiple occasions, so there must be some inkling of recognition in her for her former life. This culminates in the
Don't I know you, Mr.
Todd?
before Todd slits her throat, murdered by the man she loved, who does not recognize her anymore. Johanna Barker. A captive for most of her life, watched and desired by the men around her, Johanna is a pawn in the other players' games. Like Lucy, much of her story and tragedy takes place before the film start, within a flashback. In the present, we see the consequences. She's the judge's ward, captive, and soon-to-be wife. The audience is never really given a chance to get to know Johanna in the film, other than as a damsel to be rescued. In total, Johanna has 8 lines of dialogue, including her 3 lines of
No,
and excluding her solo song, Greenfinch and Linnetbird. She barely speaks or actively responds to a situation, other than throwing a key to her home to a man she's never spoken to before. Her first spoken line is over an hour into the film.
Sir, a gentleman knocks before entering a lady's room.
Indeed he does, but I see no lady.
Johanna is resigned to a passive and submissive position of depressed damsel. In the scene in which Anthony rescues her from the madhouse, she doesn't speak at all, or react much to his appearance. A choice I found odd, as she basically acted as a prop passed around in this scene. You really have nothing to say to the man who rescued you from an overcrowded asylum? Similar to her limited dialogue, consisting primarily of how terrible everything is, her solo has her resigned to her prison, asking the bird to help her accept her miserable situation. Laughably, she actually asks for more agency at the song's end.
If I cannot fly, let me sing.
I guess since she next throws a key at a complete stranger, she managed to find some agency before settling back into her passive role again. This key throwing really struck me as strange, as the audience hasn't seen any communication between her and Anthony yet, and she still hasn't spoken, outside of song. Her and Anthony's alleged elopement is also off-screen. No time is devoted to establishing their relationship. We only know what Anthony tells Todd and Lovett. In Burton's film, he actually demotes Johanna's role in the narrative more than in the stage adaptation, which in turn withdrew a lot of Johanna's autonomy from the original serial. In the original, she was not Todd's daughter, but was investigating the disappearance of her lover, and dressed up as a boy to find out more about the barber shop and save her partner. In the stage adaptation, it is relatively similar to the film, but Johanna kills the owner of the madhouse after Anthony is too hesitant to do so. She then chooses to leave with Anthony. In the film, she is passed from one person to another and ends it in the barber's chair. Johanna's duet Kiss Me with Anthony is cut from the film, in which she returns Anthony's affections, but also contemplates suicide at the prospect of marrying the judge. Cutting these moments adds up to the audience knowing even less about Johanna's intentions or wants within the film. And therefore we barely care what happens to her, as we don't see her in these emotionally vulnerable or compelling moments. It's likely Johanna was made into Todd's daughter in order to keep the focus on Todd, and instill more sympathy in the audience toward him. Ironically, this works against him, in my opinion, as he cares so little for Johanna in the film that her role could be cut entirely. Johanna merely acts as a way for Todd to get closer to the judge. Lucy is enough of a reason to motivate Todd's revenge, and Lucy was added after the serial too, to make Todd less of a villain and more sympathetic. The film is told almost entirely from Todd's perspective. If the original serial's plot had been kept, we could have had a parallel story of seeing Todd's destruction and murders from the outsider perspective. We could really see the havoc he wreaks, and its effects, and feel the conflict of cheering for Johanna's investigations to figure out Todd's plans, but also root for Todd to get his revenge in the end. Instead, we have the film's version, which does not hugely care for Johanna's story or fate, as her character is barely fleshed out, despite having an entire song devoted to her. The last we see of Johanna is her sitting in Todd's barber chair. We don't know if she finds Anthony or is even looking for him. Personally, I would hope that she would start a new fresh life, free of men who just desire and want to own her, not unlike her mother's experience, and find her own motivations with her newfound freedom. To Burton's credit, he seems to imply this is the case by omitting any declarations of love and affection from her to Anthony from the film, but chooses not to really explore it. Pretty women. It's possible Burton focused less on the Barker women to mirror the attitudes of his male characters in the film. Women are to be seen and not heard, as demonstrated in the song Pretty Woman. Turpin and the Beadle laugh about how superficial and simple women are in Ladies in Their Sensitivities, but make no effort to actually speak to or understand the women around them. This would make sense as to Turpin believing he can simply offer Lucy flowers after imprisoning her husband to have her fall for him, or having a nice shave to woo Johanna, who seems apprehensive at best at the thought of marrying her guardian. This superficial view of women Turpin has makes sense in that his desires for Lucy are superficial, because he's fixated by her beauty. However, once he has attacked her, it's not confirmed whether he continues to pursue her, or has received his satisfaction from that and leaves. It's implied after her suicide attempt, which drives her insane, he loses interest in her, and she is sent to Bedlam, whilst he claims ownership over her daughter. He spies on Johanna through the wall, highlighting that he simply enjoys Johanna's beauty and doesn't feel the need to actually speak to her. Todd is not that different here either, in that he never actually tries to meet or speak to his daughter. Instead, he's content with a silent memory, thinking her as dead as Lucy already.
Like her, I'd want you beautiful and pale, the way I've dreamed you were.
When Turpin and Todd sing Pretty Women, they describe these beauties doing extremely mundane, quiet activities.
Pretty women at the mirror,
In the garden,
letter writing,
flower picking,
weather watching, how they make a man
sing,
proof of heaven as you're living. Pretty women.
There's a very childlike innocence to how they describe these women. This is the ideal sweet, simple woman. Mrs. Lovett is given more character and agency because she is not the classically pretty woman, and is already widowed when the film begins. When the audience meets her, she's messy, independently working in her own shop, speaking crassly, and has the same dark, sickly look the rest of the miserable characters have, that Johanna and Lucy, previous to Barker's imprisonment, did not have. She's the opposite of what's described in Pretty Woman by Turpin and Todd, which makes her less desirable, but also allows her more freedom to do as she pleases with less judgment. Mrs. Lovett sings lovingly of Benjamin Barker in Poor Thing, suggesting her feelings for him existed well before his imprisonment, and now that he's come back, all changed, appearing as dark and miserable as she is, one would think they would make a more suitable match in tone and appearance. Mrs. Lovett fell for the charming, pretty version of Todd, but continues to love him in his current form. Meanwhile, Todd pines for the memory of his lovely, speechless wife, dismissing the ugly beggar woman that hangs around the streets. It's interesting that once Lucy no longer fits this ideal, pretty woman appearance, she's also disregarded by society. As the beggar woman, she has boils, poor skin, and a disheveled and ragged appearance that drives people away. She's now louder, begging for attention, and more crass. Ironically, it was her beauty and the judge's lust that did this to her. She has suffered for being beautiful, and now that she's no longer beautiful, she's been tossed aside by society. Anthony is just as guilty of this shallow, idealized view of women, no matter how heroic or sweet he is portrayed. He heard Johanna sing from the street, noticed her beauty, and, encouraged by her sweet smile in return to his wide-eyed gaze, asked the judge about her, and then sang about how he wanted to steal her.
I'll steal you, Johanna. I'll steal you. Do they think that walls can hide you? Even now I'm at your window.
All without actually speaking to her, or even being in the same room as Johanna. The language here is indicative of him thinking of taking another man's property, objectifying her, which makes sense as he only wants her for her appearance and her sweet childlike singing voice. Sure, he is the reason she is freed from the judge in the film's conclusion, But the expectation is now they will marry, so Johanna is still being passed from one man to another. We never actually see a scene where she returns his affections or voices her pleasure at being with him. His intentions may be romantic, but he's trying to possess and idealize her just as much as the other characters. Into the fridge with you. One common trope I want to highlight here is that of fridging female characters. This is a trope wherein a character, usually female, is killed by a villain in order to motivate their love interest or close friend to avenge them, which forwards the male storyline. It's an infamous trope as it's used a lot.
I can't stop. 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 Robin? Robin? Jill?
With the focus being on the mourning man and his journey, and not his deceased love interest and her characterization. The story of Sweeney Todd uses this trope with Lucy to motivate Todd. I appreciate the story adds some complexity to the trope, in that Lucy is revealed to be alive, and Todd's motivations have clearly gone beyond his love for his family, as he doesn't even attempt to rescue their daughter from Turpin, or recognize his wife in front of him until his revenge is complete. As is usually standard with this trope, Lucy was barely a developed character. The first part of her story was told in flashback in Mrs. Lovett's song, Poor Thing, and we already know Mrs. Lovett has lied about her death, so what else is she twisting in this story? When Lucy reunites with Todd, she says of Mrs. Lovett,
The stink of evil from below, from her. Oh, she's the devil's wife. Beware her, sir. She with no pity in her heart.
So clearly there is no love lost between the two women. Prior to this, we just saw her crazed ramblings on the street, half remembering her previous life and the cruelties done to her, with implications that she's turned to prostitution on the street. When she begins to show a glimmer of remembrance in the film's finale, she's immediately killed, ending her character arc before it had a chance to begin. But at least Todd got his revenge and didn't have to live for very long with the knowledge his revenge was a complete waste of time.
Don't I know you, mister?
It's honestly a shame that the Barker women, the reason Todd seeks revenge and kills so many, have such little character and on-screen presence. I was looking forward to seeing Johanna's reaction to what became of her real family, but we never see it. We never actually see her comment on her origins at all. Or much else. The one scene with all the Barker family alive in one room was over within a minute, and while depressing that they were never reunited properly, it does fit the bleak tone of the film, so it does make sense to do. But these women should be developed and focused upon. The whole plot revolves around the Barker family and the people trying to wiggle their way in. That made it a bigger shame that two of the three central women were never fully explored or evolved in the film. I want to know what Johanna would do with her freedom, what Lucy would think of her husband as he is now, and how they would each react to how their lives have been twisted and torn. These added moments wouldn't take more than a couple lines of dialogue or reactions to situations to accomplish, but would add a lot of what the audience thinks of the characters and to flesh them out. Lucy clearly wants to expose the corruption as she hangs around Mrs. Lovett's shop and the judge's home, but her madness holds her back. Johanna has no dreams,
Only nightmares.
but also rarely speaks, so it's hard to say what these nightmares are. It would make the story overall more engaging, as we then in turn wonder what Todd's reactions to his family as they are now would be, and we would actually care about what happens to Johanna, or feel for poor Lucy, who was previously just the annoying beggar woman. Wouldn't it have been interesting to see Johanna's reaction to recognizing her parents, to confronting them or fleeing from them and their madness. The audience is not encouraged to care or think about what comes next for Johanna, as she's barely a footnote in Todd's story, just another motive for revenge. Without expanding on the characters, it just makes them boring and takes up valuable screen time. To be blunt, if you're not going to do anything interesting with a character, cut them and find a more interesting, established character to take their place.
Don't I know you? Jeez.
At the film's conclusion, Todd has successfully avenged his imprisonment, his daughter's kidnapping, and his wife's death. Yay! Wait, no. He kills his wife, he threatens to kill his daughter, he murders Mrs. Lovett, and then is murdered by Toby. The story of Sweeney Todd is a tragic tale and a warning against revenge and its all-consuming, corrupting nature. Todd ends up destroying his family all over again in his pursuit of revenge, taking countless other lives in the process. In the finale, seeing Lucy dead on the dirty basement cobbles, the sympathy is with Todd and the anger with Mrs. Lovett. It's only when we see Toby we are reminded Todd is the real villain here. He created all of this misery with Mrs. Lovett. Holding his wife's corpse, Todd allows his throat to be cut by Toby, his quest at an end. Nothing left to live for. We're meant to feel justice has been served. Yes, he went too far, but also relief for him. He doesn't have to live with the knowledge or impact of what he did. Todd chooses to die here. His blood drips and then pours onto Lucy, until you can barely see her. She is overtaken by the actions of those around her. Did she even have any choice? His revenge has made everything worse, and has killed Lucy. Johanna, meanwhile, is barely a footnote in Todd's mind. His daughter was taken by the same man who attacked his wife, and was heading for a similar fate, but Todd left it to Anthony to solve, due to his own focus being on avenging his imprisonment and Lucy's perceived death. In Epiphany, he sings,
And I'll never see Johanna. No, I'll never hug my girl to me.
if it weren't for these small lines, I'd think he didn't care for Johanna at all, or remember her existence. Sometimes the old Barker slips through, not the demonic Todd, although he speaks of her like she's already dead.
Goodbye, Johanna. You're gone and yet you're mine.
The next few lines regarding Johanna are also telling in how little he cares for her now. She's more a memory than a real person.
You stay, Johanna, the way I've dreamed you up. I think I miss you less and less as every day goes by, Johanna.
Johanna's lines about marrying Anthony from the play are cut here too, again removing precious lines about her own agency, desires, and dreams. In conclusion, it's true that all the stories in Sweeney Todd are pretty miserable. No one gets a happy ending in this tale. But Lucy and Johanna get no happy ending, along with little agency or control of it. They are the least responsible for their own fates, and the man that connects them, Todd, doesn't care for them any longer in any meaningful way. Mrs. Lovett at least contributed to her fate through her own manipulation, crimes, and obsession with Todd, as she had agency throughout the whole tale to stop working with him or help any other character. Despite being a villain, she was also a really interesting and compelling character that the audience could like and root for. I felt the most sorry for Johanna and Lucy by the film's end. These men, and Mrs. Lovett, come into their lives, shake things up wildly, and leave Johanna and Lucy broken and lost behind them. Even Burton couldn't muster up enough empathy to study these unfortunate characters, taking what could have been some strong emotional impact and some great characters away from his audience and wasting their screen time.
So it's true.
Sir, a gentleman knocks before entering a lady's room.
Indeed he does, but I see no lady. I told myself that the sailor was lying, but my Johanna would never betray me, never hurt me, so.
Sir, I will leave this place.
I think that only appropriate, since you no longer find my company to your liking. We shall provide you with new lodgings. Until this moment, I have spared the rod. But the ungrateful child has broken my heart. When you've learned to appreciate what you have, perhaps we shall meet again. Until then, think on your sins. You wait from here. I'll return with the coach in less than half an hour. Don't worry. No one will recognize you. You're safe now.
Safe. So we run away and then all our dreams come true.
I hope so.
Never had dreams. Only nightmares.
Johanna, when we're free of this place, all the ghosts will go away.
No, Anthony. They never go away.
I'll be right back to you. Half an hour and we'll be free.
Come for a shave.